So a serial killer is an individual who kills at least 3 individuals, and there is a cooling off period in between each murder. Normally, from the beginning to the end, you have at least 30 days. You're talking about, as I said, at least 3 victims, usually more than that. Depending upon how long a serial killer operates, you could be talking about double digits. Probably one of the most prolific serial killers I've ever seen was Andrei Chikatilo. Chikatilo, at the time of execution in Soviet Union, Chikatilo, more than 50 victims, and all of his victims were children, young people. Okay, there were a few young women that he killed, but more than 50 people. When you start looking at individuals like Green River, Gary Ridgway, now we're looking at more than like 19, 20 individuals. So serial killers operate for long periods of time. They oftentimes will fly under the radar because they are incredibly good at what we call impression management. So, like for instance, the BTK, who was recently apprehended, BTK was, in so many ways, the person that nobody would have thought would have been a serial killer. He was married. He was a member of the community. People knew him. He killed for a number of years, then went dormant, and then came back. And when he came back, people started putting 2 and 2 together, and they figured out that that person who was right next door to them and had been right next door to them for like 20 years was an individual who had killed a number of individuals. And that's what you get with a serial killer.
The crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer made the world cringe. 17 murders. Cannibalism. Sex with the dead. A man who made his Milwaukee apartment into a violent and erotic death chamber.
One thing led to another. It took more and more deviant type behaviors to satisfy my urges.
Dahmer even tried to create living sex zombies by injecting acid into their brains. Jeffrey Dahmer, it seemed, was as close to raw evil as the world had ever known.
Jeffrey thought he was the devil. Jeffrey thought he was so evil that he was equal to the devil.
Dennis Andrew Nilsen was Britain's most prolific serial killer. He was jailed in 1983 after human remains were found blocking the drains of his London home. As police excavated his garden, he confessed to 16 murders. He told how he liked to wash the bodies and keep them for company, sometimes talking to them and sleeping with them for weeks after the killing. In 1992, Nilsen agreed to be interviewed by Central Television for this program. The historic film that follows will be used in helping British investigators understand the mind of the serial murderer. Nilsen started by disputing how many people he'd killed.
Well, there were 12. There weren't 15 or 16. When I was at the back of the police car heading to the police station at the moment of my arrest, they asked me how many there were, and I didn't really know. I just gave them a figure. And because I was cooperating with the police, I decided I'll stick with it. You know. There were three of those victims were invented just to complement the continuity of evidence to the police, because to keep them happy.
The dismembered remains of only half a dozen men were found. Nilsen had kept the bodies in cupboards or beneath floorboards before disposing of them.
In the end, it was when I was, say, 2 or 3 bodies under the floorboards began to accumulate that come the summer, it got hot, and I knew it would be a smell problem.
Yes.
But I thought, well, I'm going to have to deal with the smell problem. And I thought, what would cause the smell more than anything else? And I came to the conclusion it was the innards, the soft parts of the body, the organs and stuff like that. So on a weekend, I would sort of pull out the floorboards, and I found it totally unpleasant, and I'd get blinding drunk, so I could face it, and start the dissection on the kitchen floor. And I'd go out and be sick outside in the gardens. And
what sort of preparation would you have to make for that?
What do you mean preparation?
Well, I mean, if you were simply to bring these young men's bodies into your kitchen and start to dismember them, that's going to leave an awful mess.
That doesn't leave a mess. Why does it leave a mess?
Well, it could, couldn't it?
No, it doesn't.
No.
It doesn't leave a mess. You see, when people in death situations, where a knife is involved, and there's a lot of blood flying around. I'd love to stab you right now, you have to stab me. The heart is pumping away then, there'll be blood splashing all over the place.
Yes.
Funny enough, in a dead body, there's no blood spurts or anything like that. It congeals inside and forms part of the flesh in there, and it becomes like anything in a butcher's shop. There's little or no blood.
So there's no problem with...
If you get a plastic, you know these plastic bags that you have, dustbin liners, you slit one of those so it forms kind of a sheet. You haul the body out onto the floorboards, put it on the sheet, and then cut it out.
Jeff's fascination with nature and small animals continued into his teenage years when he became curious about what they looked like on the inside. For specimens, he collected roadkill. Riding around the country roads in Bath, carrying garbage bags, Jeff searched for carcasses. Jeff brought the roadkill he found into the backyard of the house, and there in the secrecy of the woods, he dissected the animals.
I really have become convinced that that was sort of the starting point in this downward spiral of his. And it was associated with his puberty. And when you have hormones kicking into this terrible mixture, what he's doing, he's investigating insides of animals. And his sexuality was developing at the same time.
Teenage Jeff was discovering that he felt sexually attracted only to men. But the thoughts of sex with men became interlocked with fantasies of killing another man and dismemberment. The fantasies excited him, but they were unspeakable.
I think it was around age 14 or 15. Started having obsessive thoughts of violence intermingled with sex. And it just got worse and worse. I didn't know how to tell anyone about it, so I didn't. I just kept it all inside.
For Jeffrey Dahmer, the summer of 1978 started with high school graduation. It would be downhill from there. His parents, after years of open and bitter fighting, divorced. Jeffrey's father, Lionel, moved out of the family house in Bath, Ohio, and into this nearby motel. Unbeknownst to Lionel, Jeff's mother took younger brother David and moved to Wisconsin. Jeffrey found himself home alone. Jeffrey was 18, and like most teens his age, he had active sexual fantasies. But Jeffrey's deviated from the norm to include thoughts of killing his lover. Now, the isolation of the empty family home gave him the opportunity to act out those fantasies. Just weeks after graduation, Jeffrey picked up a hitchhiker along the road. It was 18-year-old Stephen Hicks.
I wish I just kept on going, but I didn't. Turned around, picked him up, and that's when the nightmare became a reality.
Jeffrey invited Hicks back to the house. They drank beers and spent a couple of hours just hanging out. Then Hicks said he had to go, but Jeffrey didn't want to be alone. He attacked Hicks, knocking him out with a barbell, and then he strangled him. Dahmer had fulfilled his fantasy, but he was lucid enough to know that he had committed a murder. He quickly began to hide the evidence. He dismembered Hicks' body with a knife, a skill he had practiced as a younger teen with roadkill. He put the pieces into trash bags and loaded them into his car in the middle of the night. He was heading for a dump site when he was pulled over by the police for drifting across the center line. The officers asked Jeff what was in the bags and why he was out so late. Jeff was trapped for the first time, but he was ready with a lie. He coolly told the cops he was troubled by his parents' divorce and couldn't sleep, so he thought a trip to the dump would take his mind off things. The police let him go with a ticket. Jeff returned home, racked with guilt over the murder. He stashed the bones of Stephen Hicks under the house for 2 weeks. Then he smashed them to bits with a sledgehammer. Behind the house, Jeff spun in a circle, tossing the fragments among the leaves and brush. Lionel tried for a year to help his alcoholic son, to no avail. Jeff was sent to stay with his father's mother near Milwaukee. There, he seemed to find some stability at last, making a concentrated effort to turn his life around. He stopped drinking, went to church with his grandmother, and he fought what he believed were immoral homosexual urges, which eventually led to his inescapable fantasies about murder. Dahmer even found jobs, first at a blood bank and then working nights as a chocolate mixer in a candy factory. But the lifestyle of church-going and right living, as he called it, didn't last. After 3 quiet years in his grandmother's home, Jeff came face to face with his fears. At the library, a man handed him a note offering sexual favors. Dahmer declined, but he would later say the note was a turning point. It awakened sexual desires deep inside him. Specifically, he wanted the submissive company of another male. He wanted someone to fulfill his sexual needs, but he didn't want to be burdened by anyone else's needs. Jeffrey started with a perfectly submissive partner. He stole a store window mannequin. He kept the plastic man in his closet, bringing it out to masturbate onto until his grandmother found it and insisted he get rid of it. On his free nights, Jeffrey began exploring gay life in Milwaukee, browsing through porn shops and going to bathhouses. The bath clubs catered mostly to men seeking anonymous sex. To make his partners there submissive, Jeffrey gave them drinks laced with sleeping pills. When they fell unconscious, he would lie down next to them, listening to the sounds of their bodies, their heartbeats, their stomachs. But the drugging experiments ended when one man overdosed and spent a week in the hospital. Jeff was asked never to return to the club. But he then discovered the gay bars and discos of Milwaukee. These would become the killer's favorite hunting grounds. By his late 20s, Jeffrey Dahmer was settled in Milwaukee, living at his grandmother's and prowling the city's gay scene. No one suspected that this reclusive loner with boyish good looks was on his way to becoming a psychopathic serial killer.
He did take pleasure in the fact that he was in control of his own little world, that nobody knew what was going on, that he was the master of it.
Dahmer could fit in with any group, and you wouldn't say, oh, he must be crazy, or he must be a killer. That's why he was so successful. He was not a repulsive individual.
Certainly not in Milwaukee's gay nightclubs.
We have it on good facts that he was considered somewhat of a honey in the gay community, that people found him attractive. Several people told us that he was the kind of guy that you wanted to take care of, you wanted to baby him.
But Dahmer had very specific requirements for his men.
He chose a body style. He liked long, lean, smooth, muscular body styles. And it didn't matter if they were black, white, yellow, red, or brown. If he found them attractive, he would try to get them.
In November 1987, Dahmer met 25-year-old Steve Toomey at a downtown club called 219. After a few drinks, they left the bar for a night at the nearby Ambassador Hotel. Dahmer used an old trick to get Toomey into the submissive state he craved.
I had put some sleeping pills in his drink to render him conscious, and was just going to spend the night with him. When I woke up in the morning, my forearms were bruised, and his chest was bruised, and blood was coming out of his mouth. He was hanging over the side of the bed. And I have no memory of beating him to death, but I must have.
But Dahmer didn't panic. He went out and bought the biggest suitcase he could find. At the hotel, he crammed Toomey's body into the case, dragged it into a taxi, went back to his grandmother's house, and dismembered Toomey in the basement.
That's when the obsession went into full swing.
He decided after that second death that he would no longer attempt to control his desires, that he would give full rein to them, yield entirely to them, and after that his life became the pursuit of unmitigated sexual pleasure.
Dahmer now decided to pursue his fantasies of ultimate control. It was no longer enough to have his partners submissive just for a night. He wanted to keep them that way forever.